Hello, dear listener, and welcome to episode 115 of the Noclip podcast. Danny here with a bit of an intro because we have a very special episode. If you've been listening to the podcast for the past couple of weeks, you know that myself and Jeremy have been fawning over the two-player productions produced Double Fine Psychodyssey, an odyssey of a documentary series taking place over the course of 8 years of production of both a video game and, I guess, a documentary series. And that's what we're here to talk about. The production of that documentary. We managed to grab three of the folks involved in two-player productions, Paul Owens, Paul Levering, and Renat Sirbaev, to talk about everything from what microphones they use to how they covered a scene, to breaking the fourth wall, having one of their team join the game's production, how this whole thing gets funded, the creative collaboration between them and Double Fine, and plenty of insight into their understandings and I guess everything they've learned about this really rare, incredibly rare type of deep embedding in a game studio. It was a great chat. Myself and Jeremy had a blast talking to them. It's a full house. So without further ado, actually, the one thing to do before we do that, which is shout out all of our Battle Pass holders: James Brown, Jason Drury, Cody Krieger, Sven Huster, Forrest Pruitt, Andy Fegan, Cameron Ladd, George Sikotis, Jacob Godserve, and Tohir Tiliev. Thank you all so much. It's the start of a new month. So no better time. I guess that used to be a thing back when Patreon billed everyone on the first of the month, but now it just bills whenever you sign up. So I guess every time there's no better time to support Noclip. We just hit render on a secret project on Redacted, so we'll be able to announce that very soon, actually, probably on the next podcast. But until then, please enjoy this bonus podcast with Noclip and two-player productions crossing the streams. Enjoy. All right, I'm delighted to be joined by... We've never had this many people at one time, Jeremy. I'm not quite sure what to do. It's going to be...
It's crowded
in
here.
It is crowded in here, but it feels good because we're joined by the production powerhouse of two-player productions, the folks behind so much work within the field of games documentarianism, but no greater than, I guess, what we're about to talk about. Their magnum opus, Double Fine Psychodyssey, the 31-part, 21-hour series documenting almost a decade of development at Double Fine. It's what we've been talking about on the podcast for the past 2 weeks, and I'm delighted to be joined by three of the team, Paul Levering, Paul Owens, and Renat Sirbaev. Thank you all for coming in. Paul, where do we... Well, actually, I should say Paul Owens. This probably happens to you guys all the time. That's my first question. Paul Owens, how annoying is it to have your creative collaborator have the same name as you?
No, it's fine. It's good. One name to remember. It's just like, the Pauls. It's like when we go to any like space, it's very easy to remember.
Yeah. Well, let me pose the same question to Paul Levering. How do you feel about it?
We mostly just call him Owens, so it's not like it's never really that much of a problem.
Perfect. Well, that's where I'm going to take it up. Owens, let's start with you. How are you guys feeling? It's been like maybe less than 2 weeks since this came out. I feel like there's probably a fairly steady, rainfall of feedback coming back as folks start and finish the series and engage with it and stuff like that. How are you feeling? How is the team feeling about, how it's gone and getting it out there? Because it must be a very... we talk about that sort of postpartum thing that happens with game developers when they release their games, but I imagine there's something similar happening here with a work that's this big.
Not true for filmmakers. It's a total lie. No, it feels real good. I mean, we believed in it, going back years now. So it was just sort of just waiting for this moment when it would finally come out and we could just like let the comments just like wash over us and be happy and content. So it's good.
What was bring us back, I guess, to the start of the project. Did you know it was always going to be this long, either in terms of the amount of time it was going to take or in terms of how much work was going to come out of it for the viewer at the other end?
I mean, the Broken Age one was supposed to be 9 months, so that answers it right there. Okay,
we came out of Broken Age thinking that was like this. We were really proud of it. It was this great thing that we accomplished. And doing like a Psychonauts doc, like I personally was like, how could it be as good as the Broken Age doc? Because development's going to be smoother. They're not going to have the same problems. And I guess it's cool that we'll do like a 3D platformer. Like that'll be different. But I was kind of like, I felt like we'd already done the best thing that we were ever going to do. And when Psychonauts 2 just kept on going and going and going, and all this stuff happened, it just transformed into a completely different thing in my mind.
Did you guys have an idea of what types of narrative threads that you were going to, follow? How do you approach that, especially on something so longitudinal? Like, how do you, are you just filming a lot of coverage and it's like a cone at a certain stage you start to find out where the stories are, or at the start are you just filming everything and trying to understand what you're recording?
We just knew that if they're going to make Psychonauts 2, there's going to be something that's going to happen. And as long as we are vigilant and get the meetings and respond to stuff correctly, then, hopefully we'll get some good stuff and be able to, pivot and be like, oh, we should interview them. Maybe we should get this instead. Or, just responding to what's happening because we're basically there all the time. So it's not that hard to be like, oh, we should actually talk to Emily because it seemed like she's kind of like getting into the groove a little bit here. So stuff like that. I don't know, it's just being present, watching. Yeah.
How does the sort of sorry, Paul, how did I guess the moment to moment of being there and I guess the autonomy of 2-player in terms of like, it was one of the things that I think we probably got wrong when we were talking amongst ourselves, me and Jeremy, about the production is like, what is 2-player at this stage? Like, and how has that changed since the start of the project? Like, are you guys there 5 days a week? Are you now part of Double Fine? Are you now part of Microsoft? That type of stuff.
We were pretty much early on in the Broken Age doc. It was just me, and then Paul and Asif would come down for a little bit of time, and then we were stationed in Portland. But I'd met girlfriend here. I came down. I was spending more time at the office. They gradually moved down as well. So then we all became just like at Double Fine all the time throughout the Broken Age doc. And nothing's really changed since then. Like we all live in the city and we go there all the time. But Double Fine never acquired 2-player. Like
Okay.
they hired us as employees. And then 2-player actually officially closed as a business at the end of 2021. Because like we weren't really doing any contract work anymore.
Right.
And keeping a business alive, it's like you have to have revenue flow that's coming in. And it was like, well, maybe I'll cut a trailer on the weekend or something, but it takes a lot more than a weekend to do something like that. So it's like, it was just, do we keep taxing ourselves to like keep this company open when we already have full-time work, like doing the Double Fine stuff? So officially, like 2-player was retired at the end of 2021. Like there was no acquisition or anything like that. We just sort of let it go to sleep, put it to bed.
Okay. And there was some other, you guys do other work aside from that? Or I know, Owens, I saw the trailer for your independent movie that you made, Landlocked, right? Was that something that was done like in your quiet times when you weren't editing a 21-hour documentary?
Time. Yeah, it was in the quiet time. No, that's been sort of concurrent because I sort of started that in 2014. I started shooting that just sort of as like a personal project. And then in 2015, we started Psychodyssey. So they've been running concurrently and they came out within a month of each other, which is weird. But it's cool.
Excellent. Available on all streaming services. Get your Amazon Prime, all that stuff.
Amazon, iTunes, on Xbox, Hulu? No, not Hulu. It's out there. Just Google it. Come on.
Yeah, just Google it. Landlocked. Renat, so when did you join the team? If I'm to understand, you sort of were helping Owens a lot with the post-production stuff for those later episodes. How did you come to know the guys? And yeah, what was it like when you were approached to actually edit some of these?
So I think I started getting in touch with Paul back and forth around 7 years ago when I was doing subtitles for the Double Fine YouTube channel. And then throughout those 7 years, I think we just sort of became closer friends. And towards the end of 2020 is actually when I started the work on the Psychodyssey. And I believe my very first thing that I did was it the Amnesia Fortnite episode 2017 one, right? Episode 12. I recut that from the 5 hours that existed previously into a 1 hour long episode, which is currently, well, as a matter of fact, that was a longer episode when we broke it into a 12 and 13.
Oh yeah.
Two separate episodes, right? Yeah. So the end of 2020, I suppose, is when I actually joined the crew. It's close to 2 years, slightly more than 2 years at this point.
How did they transfer that much 4K footage to you?
So
My internet connection is pretty fast.
Oh yeah, okay.
It's not
Doesn't like to
big of a
brag.
problem.
But
It's not 4K fast,
yeah,
right?
that's a whole other conversation. We want to get into that already.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, I want to ask you guys a little bit about like editing process and organization. So as you're filming this stuff over 7 odd years, do you like is it mostly a process of note taking and saying like these are kind of the beats we're anticipating, or is there a like 400-hour premiere project that then gets divided into episodes, or what's the kind of rough process here?
Well, me and Paul can kind of hand this back and forth. So it's like shoot every day, take the cards, take the mics, dump them to the server. Like initially we had local hard drives that we're using, like big Pegasus drives. But then Double Fine did build a server for us, and that became like our video database server. And we dumped the cards up to that, and they all went into folders for like that day with like a sequential number. So we just keep building up these folders, number 64, number 98, number 428, like going and going and going. And then all the while, like Paul is pulling footage down from the folders and sort of like roughing out episodes as we're going. And I think that like he has his own like note keeping process as we're shooting and staying aware of like what's going on.
yeah, hard to describe. I mean, it helps that we're the cameraman as well. So basically, it's easy to remember when something amazing has happened, because as you're filming it, you're looking at a little viewfinder and you're like, oh my God, this is fucking, oh my God, I can't believe I'm getting this. Or like, this is really emotional, I'm getting moved right now. Or like, wow, this is fascinating what just happened or what he said. And kind of just like file it away. Like it sort of makes a weird impression in your mind. And then you can either immediately go and be like, I want to edit that right now. Or just like, okay, I'm going to remember that. And you, I don't know, it just becomes clear that, okay, this is probably going to be the end of the episode, isn't it? Like, it was a lot of building off of what we had for DFA in terms of like, okay, how are we going to actually figure out how to tell the story? And there's a lot we can get into with trust and just building trust over those 3 years and all that. But yeah, I've lost the question. Anyway.
No, yeah,
No,
it's funny. I do want to get into that sort of stuff, but I also have, now that Jeremy started, some like interesting questions about the technical side of it. One of the things that like I just think is incredible is how you guys handled audio. Just having done, we've done some embedded work, nowhere near as long or as involved as you guys have, but one of the hardest things that we've come across is just trying to get good isolated audio from people and knowing who's going to be the person you need to be focused on, and getting good audio equipment. Obviously, you kind of can't skimp on that. You need to like get good stuff. How many like audio sources are you recording in one of those meetings? And also, one of my favorite things about this doc is watching technology improve over 8 years, and how you went from what seemed like some pretty powerful radio mics to these little like button-on mics that seem to have really good audio, actually, considering how lo-fi they look.
Those
Yeah,
mics,
exactly.
Yeah, those mics changed my life, and I'll give like the biggest endorsement for those. They're called Instamic. And the guy and his team who created them, it was I think it was a Kickstarter, or GoFundMe. It was a crowdfunded like audio piece, and I only heard about it because one of the people in the audio department had like backed it and got one, and he was like, "Oh, you should check this thing out." And I'm like, "What is this? What's it do?" 24-bit like internal recording, like 96 kilohertz, and it's just controlled by an app. You just have to like get a little magnet clamps, you stick it on somebody and just like hit a button, and it's good for like 8 hours of record time.
But
You
you
guys should
can't
get
monitor is the only issue, I'm guessing.
You can't monitor. You can monitor one at a time, but actually have like some pretty strong reasoning behind this. In that, like before that, we were using a Roland R44, like portable recorder that had 4 inputs, and I would boom on one of those inputs in the instances where we needed more than like 4 microphones, because like it'd be 3 wireless mics and then a boom, or just 4 wireless mics. And I think we might have gotten like 1 extra that we could attach to a camera, which only gave us like, 4 people actually mic'd up and then a boom. And using the boom sucks in Double Fine because there's just stuff all over the ceiling. There's stuff everywhere. And then there's the way that the lights are made.
Distracting.
You're putting shadows all over the place. It's just, that's the worst. So the Insta mics, they cost about 200, something like that, 200 each. The wireless lavs that we were using were basically $300 each, and they'd get ruined at least once a year because you can't really wire people up. We don't have time to do that. So it's like, it is our job to just kind of like have as little impact as possible. So as a meeting is starting up, we have to rush in there, just clip mics on everybody as fast as possible, get into the corners of the room, like stay out of the way. Like we're not supposed to really be interfering with how things happen at the office. And like, I'd be monitoring those lav mics and people would be playing with the cord. The thing would pop off, it would fall under the chair would roll over it. And I couldn't really do anything because I'd be interrupting the meeting. So I was basically just monitoring bad audio happening that I couldn't do anything about. So when we got the Insta mics, I was like, well, what if there's something wrong with it? And I was like, it doesn't really matter because I was dealing with the same thing before. And in the initial like run of those units, they were pretty good, but he's gone through like 3 different generations of them now. And I would say that they're practically bulletproof. Like,
wow.
I think out of like hundreds or maybe even thousands of recordings, we've maybe lost like 2.
Barely any. There's a little bit of disposability to them as well, where like they're so inexpensive, and it's just like you throw them on like 20 people in a meeting, and you're going to have the audio for all those people at least. So it's like it was definitely like, I feel like we got way better once we got those mics in, and like as the team grew, we were able to actually like keep track of that. And
we went from like 4 to 5 audio sources to having like 16 like simultaneous audio sources that were all really good.
It's
you
crazy.
guys gotta get them. You gotta get them. Yeah, talk them up wherever.
We probably will right after this meeting.
Really,
I think I was on B&H during one of the interviews being like, what are these? like trying to like with the little blue line in the middle and being like, because I saw you with the Roland strapped to your hip in 1 or 2 of the shots, right? Obviously, there's sometimes where you just can't avoid, and then obviously as if there's a whole, beautiful fourth wall breaking aspect to the whole thing as well that emerges. But yeah, what was the mentality, I guess? Because there's different forms of, documenting life. Did you guys have like, what was your sort of broad, I guess, methodology for this sort of stuff, like just to disappear into the background? Jeremy, you refer to it as like it's almost like wildlife photography in this one.
Yeah, well, I embedded with Supergiant for a while, so I feel like watching this was very cathartic because it's, I could imagine myself very easily kind of like in the office, kind of trying to recede into the background. But you guys got so deep into it because it was such a longitudinal project. So yeah, I'm curious about like, kind of your mindset seems to be one of disappearing to kind of get the authentic thing happening. But I'm also curious about kind of how that relationship has changed over time because you've known these people for so long, and sort of like what the, not like what your rapport is with them, but like what's the feeling? Like, do you guys feel like the camera is invisible during some of those more tense meetings, like some of the emotional highs of the documentary? Is there a sense that, when those things are happening, are people kind of like glancing over at the camera and being like, oh, are we filming this? Or like, what's the feeling on that?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes. I don't know. Did you have an answer, Paul? For this one?
I'm always surprised that people say that we become like invisible after a while, but I think that there is like effort that goes into that to like not draw attention to yourself. Like usually when we set up, that's kind of where we stay and we don't move around while something is happening. We try to avoid that. We just try not to make a lot of movements. It's just stand very still for an hour and like don't make noise and don't draw attention to yourself. And hopefully people can just kind of forget that you're there and do what they normally do. And, for everybody at the office, it's different. Like some people are more comfortable with it than others, and some people get used to it quicker than others.
Were there people on staff, because we've had it in the past where there are folks who just do not want to be filmed for any one reason? Was there any folks at the studio who were just kind of like, you always made sure not to have them in shot? Because I never saw like anyone mosaiced or anything like that.
It's not an instance of being like, I absolutely cannot appear on camera, but more like, I don't want to be on camera. So if somebody like is in the background of something, we will make an effort to like not frame them up. But if you need to be wide and they're in there, it's like, it's okay. It more comes down to being like, I don't want to be directly interviewed because like I don't feel comfortable in that sort of a situation.
Yeah. What was it like, I guess... there's like a million and one different questions, but let's talk about the trust stuff a little bit, Owens, because obviously there are so many different characters in this who, have their own arcs, and they're like, some people come out looking, everything's open to interpretation, but like some people could come out looking better or worse, or victims, or evil, what evil people, but like victims or what's evil
Say
bastards.
that about Tim. It's terrible.
I don't know, how dare you.
Bad guys or good guys. It's always open to interpretation, right? And ultimately, you're not like, you can only be so in control of that. Once it hits viewers' eyeballs, they make their own minds up. But what was it like, I guess, the trust that you built at the start of this project? Presumably, you've been working with these people for a long time, and you guys have probably been at this studio longer than a lot of the devs have at this stage. Did you feel like you had that trust already at the start of the project? Did you have that buy-in? Did that change much over the 8 years?
I think people seeing what we did on DFA and then seeing the result and being like, okay, that was fair, and we even looked good, actually, was what kind of like, that usually happens with us. People are just, they don't trust us. They're like, who are these guys? Then they see the final thing and like, oh shit, okay, that works for me, sure. So it wasn't a lot of that. After DFA, we pretty much, everyone was totally cool with us, and we kind of like got to know everyone as those 3 years went on. So there were still people we were like kind of like discovering near the end of that, and just like, this person's great on camera, actually. This person's really good. So it's kind of like knowing everyone's strengths and weaknesses in a way too. It was like, God, Ray's so good. We didn't even know. We need to follow whatever he's doing next because he's just great on camera and the audience loves him. And so it was a lot of like knowing the cast really well and them knowing us. And yeah, we got a little bolder too. I feel like we asked a little more personal questions on this one and just tried to focus more on the characters and the emotions, and maybe less on like, here's how we make a game kind of stuff that we did on Broken Age, because we did that. So.
Right.
Yeah, this was more about getting to the emotional core, I think, for sure.
Was there any stuff that you think was particularly like sensitive or difficult to talk about or difficult to capture? Obviously, the bad meeting about Crunch was like a fascinating. I've heard of those stories before. You know what I mean? But like to see it was really something. What's the process around something like that? Like, and what's the process with like, ultimate clearance? Because obviously there has to be a very understanding relationship between you and the studio leadership at Double Fine. How does that sort of work? Where is the creative trust there when it comes to like moments like that, for instance, which could very easily have been not shown? You know what I mean?
I'd actually argue that needed to be shown. And it was like an uncomfortable moment. Like it happened spontaneously, which is why we even had it. Because like normally, if there's going to be anything that's like that heated or that personal, or in regards to like the discussion of things that people are like that upset about, that would maybe be like a separate meeting that we wouldn't get invited to, because people want to be able to feel safe and not have to be like in front of the cameras for something like that. So even as that was happening, we're like, this is happening, okay? So I think that we were all pretty upset in the moment as well. But it all comes down to that trust that is hopefully built, over the years by doing... I think like during the Broken Age documentary, it was a bit different because of how reactive that was, how we were putting out episodes as we were doing it, and the team got to see how we were telling their story. and that helped them be comfortable with us. And in this one, we didn't put out practically anything, with the exception of like backer updates, which are much more like marketing style videos. So we're getting all this footage and all this material, and it definitely left a lot of people wondering, like, what are you guys going to do with all this stuff? And a lot of it is like trying to approach everything from the sense that like maybe if we were just like contract journalists doing like an expose, we would do all of our shooting and then look at the like most embarrassing pieces of footage and put all that together, and that's how you get like your sensational look at these people doing like this dumb stuff, look at how bad all these people are, because everybody has their moments of like highs and lows. And I think that like part of our biggest concern is looking at like, well, maybe that person was having a really bad day, and like we're not going to use this because that's not fair to them, because that's not really who they are. And just trying to find the core of like who everyone is and try to represent them fairly, and not like throw them under the bus for having like a bad day or a bad experience, and like making that part of their story.
It's so interesting. One of the things that came up a lot with me and Jeremy were talking about this was how it's impossible. Like we were saying, like, you know, it's from inside the studio. It's released by the studio. We're very sensitive to the idea that like the work that we do is you know, marketing for studios, right? It's like something we always have to be like super aware of. Because of the perception of what's going on and the cost involved and all this sort of stuff. So it was funny like talking about it through that lens. And Jeremy, you brought up the point of like, it's like so much more verite when there's so much of it as well.
Yeah.
Because it's like,
because you can't
it's
hide
harder
anywhere.
Yeah,
with that
like,
runtime.
Your agenda, you'd have to be an amazingly, you know, adept, you know, filmmaker and editor to lie to people over the course of that many hours. But yeah, just to that point, I guess was there any you know, one of the characters, I forget the gentleman's name now, the project lead,
Zach?
Yes, Zach. Yeah. So for instance, his arc is fascinating, and it enters into that very, you know, like sort of opaque in company politics thing, where like some people are good guys, some people are bad guys, everyone thinks they're the good guy. It's just difference of opinions, a lot of it as well. Like in a situation like that where it's so open to interpretation, how do you pick which version of that story you tell? Is it the version you've captured? Is it like how do you know, did you consider doing like a pickup with Zach after he left to get his side? You know what I mean? Like how do you decide which version to immortalize, I guess?
Well, we try to be fair. I mean, in some way it is our point of view because I'm there for everything we film, so it is in some way, this is how I saw it. So someone else at the company could see that and be like, oh, you were way too soft on him, or like way too hard on him or something. But in some way it is my point of view on it because everything was captured was my point of view. So just tried to be fair. And Tim always has a thing where it's like, okay, just imagine the person is sitting there next to you watching this cut. Would you actually be comfortable sitting there watching it with them? And so I think we ran it through for everyone, just sort of internal, like, would I be okay? I think I would be okay. I think I would be okay. I think we were fair. Beyond that, I don't know. Sorry, it's really complicated, isn't it?
Yeah, it's exactly. I'm asking you to go through an internal process, probably the one that you don't often need to really vocalize. Sorry, Paul, yours.
Oh, it's like for as much as we get, we definitely don't get everything. And like the stuff in the doc is largely like we are invisible characters who are experiencing all these things. And there's a lot of stuff that we don't get. And so it's not reflective of everyone's experience, but we try our best to sort of figure out what the cross section of all these things are. And at least we don't like digging into stuff that we don't see. So it's kind of like the stuff that we focus on is the stuff that we get on camera, because anything outside of that is kind of like, it gets murky, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
So we tend to try to stick to that.
Yeah, I thought you guys did a fantastic job of the tone of this whole thing feels very like objective is the wrong word because it feels very personal and it feels very intimate, and like I can feel you guys' sort of social relationship to these characters. But I thought that the way it was presented was done so even-handedly. I was talking to Danny a little bit about how like there's a totally different version of this doc series where you do like the reality television like violin dissonant sting when something like a Gordon Ramsay kitchen nightmare sting happens when something dramatic happens. But yeah, I even in the moments where there's, you know, you're sort of foreshadowing things that'll happen with Zach, or there's kind of like visual indicators that foreshadow the tension that may be about to arise. I thought it was incredibly fair. There's even one moment that really stood out to me is James was paying a compliment to Zach even as they were having their initial tension and like starting to butt heads. He was like, I aspire to have the level of knowledge about games that this guy has inside him. And I thought that was so cool because it like, you know, I mean, again, I'm trying to talk around using the word villain because I don't think that Zach was a villain, but like when there is an antagonistic force, I think that there is a temptation as an editor to be like, okay, we need to like use music or timing or like perspective to kind of shape this person into the antagonistic force so that moment hits harder. And I feel like you guys really had faith in just the events as they happened. I never felt like I was being emotionally manipulated by the doc series. So yeah, that's more of a compliment than a question, but I just had to mention it as like, yeah, no, it's like there was, you guys are real craftsmen when it comes to being like objective and even-handed about this stuff. It felt very nuanced and, you know, clear.
Yeah, there was so much. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Danny. It's okay.
No. It's funny because like I feel like some of the, it's like it's like jazz. It's about the notes you don't play. There's a lot of like stuff that I really enjoyed about this that was not even what you did, but what you didn't do. Like I think there's one episode where there's a couple of lower thirds, or not lower thirds, a couple of like titles that sort of explain what's going on, but like for the most part, over like dozens of hours, you'd never put text on the screen. You didn't, like, the story just told itself. Like, obviously it didn't. You had to fucking edit this thing and pull your hair out for years probably, but like that even on its own. And there are discussions that were going on in the Noclip Discord because we have a bunch of like video producer people sort of in there. And it was that type of stuff that like really stood out on what Jeremy was saying.
There's a little, I don't know if it's like, it's not a funny story, but maybe it's interesting. But like the doc had been like 95% assembled, maybe 99%, and we like showed it internally to the company for feedback.
Right.
And it's like everybody at the studio got to watch it. And a lot of the stuff that we got back is like, you need to have more lower thirds, you need to have more information up on the screen. And I felt like that, I worried about that because like I thought that we hadn't made the doc for that. So it's like at that point, sort of like pulling things apart to make space to be able to take that information in, because you can't really read and listen to somebody talk at the same time. So it's like you have to find a place to put that information. And with the way that our workflow was, the idea of like changing timing and like, it was just like, please God, no. So the stuff that's in there is kind of like our compromise, where it's like, well, we can get something here, we can get something there. So I'm glad that it sort of like still works without the support from like all that. Well, what's it mean when this person says this? And it's like, hopefully I'm kind of like, you don't really get caught up in those details all that much. And it's just the human element is constantly driving you forward.
Yeah, there wasn't like a lot of like pop-up video, this is what this term means. But like, it feels like within it seemed like at least that like that stuff was getting organically explained as well. I want to talk about the post-production on this as well, because I want to talk to Renat about his experience of getting some of this stuff too. But first of all, Owens, the process of editing this thing, when did that start? Like, how concurrent was it with filming? And did you always know that you were going to produce it all in one big chunk at the end? Was that like coming off of the back that had happened with the previous series, or?
We weren't sure, but I think we were even in the beginning leaning towards not putting out until the very end, just because it was such a complicated thing on DFA, and it was, no one liked the way it was done, and it forced certain episodes to be done before they were really finished and released, and then it was like, it would have been great to look at the whole thing as one big piece and go back and like move stuff around and whatever, and so we got to do that on this one. And about the editing stuff, I don't know. What do you want to know? What
Yeah,
part?
well, when did you start? I guess like
Oh,
did
when I
you
started.
did you wait 4 years until you started editing, or were you
No,
like
no, no.
always
Right,
chipping
right
away at it?
away. Yeah, yeah. As soon as Brad was leaving, I was like, "Shit, this is gonna be good." Like, episode 2, it was already like, because Double Fine was like in a weird, like vulnerable spot, like kind of after Broken Age shipped, where it just felt like things could go either way. And even our
Right.
jobs was like unclear. It's like, are they gonna even keep us around like this? Why would they? I don't know. So in some way, we started documenting it and be like, "Hey, look, we're really hard working here. We're documenting this, and you can't fire us." Um, so it was like a weird, emotionally vulnerable time for the studio, and that kind of set the tone for everything that kind of followed.
Okay.
But yeah, as soon as Brad started leaving and like the GVR, the VR game started up, it was like shit. Okay, there's some stuff happening here. This could be something. So you just sort of like look for the origins of these stories, and it felt like this feels like something's happening now.
Well,
So
after Broken Age finished up, we did the Psychonauts retrospective, and that was kind of like the color of sky in your world. It was like a 3-piece retrospective that we put up on YouTube that people liked, and that ended up getting sort of like recut into the first episode of the doc because we'd found all those tapes that Tim had shot around the office, and it's like
Right.
Paul, has always been like, working with tape media a lot, and he was like just ripping all these tapes, and we're going through all this stuff, and it's like a treasure trove, and it makes a lot of sense as to why we're even on this project. The fact that Tim back then is walking around like videoing everything, because not a lot of people do that. And this is something that he like cares really deeply about. So I feel like that was kind of like the thing that we were doing to sort of like keep ourselves like sharp and like in the moment at the time. And it's like we had a couple instances of things like collapsing into episodes of the series. So it wasn't like we completely went dark for all those years.
Right. The editing, I guess, over the course of those years as well, Owens, it sort of, I guess, builds up. At what stage did you realize you needed a bit of outside help?
only after 5 years or so it became apparent. But no, it's just oh god, it just I don't know. It became clear at the end that it was going to just take years and years more. Like it wouldn't be out till next year if we're not,
Right.
or longer if we're not hadn't helped out. So really, it was just like shit. Okay, Tim and Spaff, they probably want this done sooner than later, and it's been a while since the game came out, so maybe we should finish it up. So it just was, and I didn't know if you'd be able to match the style, but really you can't tell. So
Yeah, I was about to say that actually. Renat, what was it like for you attempting to plug into a series, especially so late, because the episodes that you worked on were sort of in the early 20s, right, of this. What was that like? Did you have earlier versions that you could sort of go off? Was there a lot of back and forth with Owens? What was that process like for you?
Well, yeah, I saw most of the episodes like back in late December, as I mentioned, when I joined. Before I even made the first cut of the Amnesia Fortnite, or the recut rather, I watched pretty much all the episodes were ready except for the ones that I was working on, and some rough state they already existed. And technically, I think even before I joined and started doing any of editing, I provided feedback to Paul on all of those episodes, and I don't know if that maybe played a part in why Paul were even reached out to me. So
he thinks these are great.
I would
Let's
start
pick this guy. He's lovely.
because I suggested some edits in there, and I feel like maybe that played into it somehow. So yeah, I've been a fan of the studio and of the work that Two Player did for many years, and I watched all of their previous stuff multiple times, and I feel like most of the people that have watched the previous documentaries have the same experience as I had, where you have this sort of weird parasocial relationship with all the people at the studio, which became only stronger for me after I watched hours and hours of footage of the people having these meetings. But I can't say that I found it too difficult to match the style. It just came natural, I think, from all those years and of watching the content that has already been produced.
Yeah, what was in many ways you had a harder job because you weren't there when the stuff was shot in the first place. So you have to go through the process of really experiencing all that footage, first time, but divorced from the moment when it happened. What was it like, even logging the footage for that, or were you getting like sort of basic assembly cuts of these, or did you do them like right from the start?
No, the ones that I did, I made completely out of just source footage and put them together that way. The only one that wasn't made that way, I think, is the 12 and 13. And I think we haven't touched even on what we are using for the actual editing process, because most folks might find it fascinating that the software is actually
Sony
what
Vegas.
we are doing. It isn't.
Might as well be.
Funnily enough, that's the first editing program that I used when I was starting out. That was Sony Vegas, but for this one we used Final Cut, which.
Excellent. So you were,
some.
yeah. You were all presumably on Final Cut then as a result.
Yeah, but actually the DFA series was on Final Cut 7, which is like.
Oh, of course, the swap happened.
It was falling apart. Like that whole thing was really bad. So then we were on X moving forward, and we were on X for like 7-8 years, and we saw so many things change in that program where we were constantly having some strange bug that would happen with like how it would handle our cameras or how it would handle the server. Like there was, this is like Canon, like XF footage from like the Canon C300. And at first, like Final Cut doesn't like it. So it turns it into an MOV. And we're like, okay, so we got all these MOVs. And then Final Cut does finally take it natively. So now we have XF footage that's native in the sequence. Well, we had some problems on the server at one point that wiped out all of our MOVs.
Okay.
So now we open up a project, all the footage is gone. And it's like, well, I still have the source, but it's like, no, it's different because that was an MOV and this is an XF. So I had projects I had to open up and just like manually like find little bits of footage and like replace them. And, like thankfully that didn't happen a lot, but it was always like something like that. Like once a year, essentially, like something really bad happened that screwed everything up and like kind of drove us crazy, or at least drove me crazy, like over the years. I had the Apple team come out to the office to like look at the problems that we're having because they weren't that far away. And thankfully that we knew somebody over there who could just go next door and be like, you should go see what these guys are up to. And they made some suggestions that ended up our workflow mostly being based on like symlinks where footage would live on the server. And all the libraries of projects we'd work on would just be like data reference points that would point back up to the server. And when we transitioned to work from home because of COVID, that was a whole other thing that we had to adapt to, because even though the Symlink system still kind of worked if we could connect to the office, like it would find that stuff on the server, but like there's no data speed where you could actually edit like from home at the office server.
So that system that's not using like proxy files or anything, because you couldn't do proxy files for this bigger project anyway.
And we ended up doing exactly that.
Did you?
Yeah.
Wow. I was working off of the proxy files because it's the machine that I have. I don't think would have been able to handle the kind of libraries if they were source. Even with proxy, sometimes I had issues just struggling.
We had to convert everything from 2015 onward to proxy. So that was several years. We created these things called quarter libraries. So we'd have 4 per year. And like all the footage would just get dumped into those. And we would set a Mac Pro at the office to just be like, convert all this to proxy. And that process took probably like a month or so.
Oh my God.
And then myself, Renat, and our audio post guy, Steve, we all took we like divvied up the quarters, like the raw proxy footage. And then we spent maybe 2 months. Renat, do you remember how long it was?
I think it was about 2 months, just syncing all the audio manually.
Everything, every piece of footage, we sunk it all. So like,
oh my God,
by hand, because none of the automated stuff works.
How many channels was that, Paul, you think?
Well, that would be from 5 to 16 audio channels.
It's like we complain when we get these 4K projects, Jeremy, and it's like we're like rendering out the crystal dynamics timeline. You're like, thank Christ, my computer's about to fucking keel over.
Yeah.
And hearing about this, how did you guys deal with color grading then? Did you shoot much stuff in C-Log, or you YDR because you're like, screw this, it's going to take forever? How did that get handled?
We shot everything in log, and I had to color correct all of it, and I was kind of like, we feel like it's like shooting log when you're in this sort of environment. It's like it's to save the screens essentially, because you can recover that screen data, and if you expose for the screen, you're going to lose the person. So if you're doing log, you can usually have both, but it also means that, like, this isn't like HDR. It's not super fancy, and all the lighting in the office is really bad. So like the color grading process took me like maybe a year and a half or 2 years. I don't know. But like, I'm not a professional colorist, so I was just kind of trying to learn as I went. And I think I recolored the entire series, like from head to toe 3 times.
Oh my God.
That's how it goes, dude. The color grading process is so iterative. There are times I step away from a color grade and I'm like, that's 100% done. And then you come back the next day and you're like, why is every shot so green?
Totally.
I don't understand.
How many times have I said this to you guys? Like, it's like I'd be so deep into something one day and be like, oh, it looks good. And then the next day I look at it, it's like everything's fucking yellow. God.
Yeah,
So-
Jeremy's like color grading is like, yeah, you'll spend 4 days on it and then be like, look, I just need the weekend away from it, and then I'll check on Monday.
Yeah.
And then Tuesday morning, be like, I'm just gonna do one more check with a coffee. I'm just gonna check one more time.
Yeah, just 30 minutes to that fresh perspective is just like, you can't force it. Like it's one of those things where you can't sit down and just bang it out for 20 hours because it's like audio mixing is very similar. Like I work on music stuff a lot, and it becomes so subjective that you're like, all right, that snare is hitting perfectly, and then you listen to it the next day and it's like blowing your speaker out. Like you just lose all sense of objectivity after a while.
That was
To say
kind of
nothing.
that was the entire process of making this doc, which was so scary, is that we were all in it, and it was so long, and it's like, have we lost sight? When like Renat was always really good at reminding us that the doc was amazing at all times. So he was like our anchor through the whole process.
Does Double Fine have the same bane of Jeremy's existence, fluorescent lights in every room?
Yeah.
It's brutal. The grade was really good on the doc, by the way. I was paying
Yeah, it was.
attention to it the whole time. It was like very, very even. It feels very natural, but I can tell, I can tell that you took footage that looked incredibly green and made it look incredibly natural, because I could see fluorescent lights like in the background, and I was like, there's no way that this wasn't like a crazy shot to color grade.
Well, thank you. I'm like 80% pleased with it, because there's just stuff I could never fix.
Yeah.
We got new cameras halfway through as well. Well, not halfway through, like near the end, after the Microsoft thing. We went from the C300 to the C300 Mark II,
Nice.
which offered up like a ton of different log.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, let's play around with all these and try them all out. And it's like 2 of them are awful. And we shot on them for like a month. So there's a real period where I feel like the quality kind of dips before it gets good again. And then we go to Zoom footage. So it's like...
Right. Yes, of course. Yes. Owens, can I talk to you about that? So we had I used to complain about the 2020 when everything had to be done on Zoom. It was like a nightmare. We actually interviewed Tim at one stage, and I hated the footage so much that I put it on like a shitty CRT television I had and filmed the TV, and it still looked bad, but at least it looked like diegetically bad, I guess.
I liked it. It's good.
Oh, thanks very much. What was it like for you? In a way, I can kind of see. Oh, at least it's like maybe it's kind of nice to have a format change as an editor, perhaps.
Yeah.
But also just like how tricky it is to edit, because like those final 2 episodes, or maybe is it 3, I forget, are a lot of them have Zoom footage, and it's really difficult, I feel, to keep people engaged on Zoom footage. Like you have to be super smart about pacing and stuff. But how did you find that process of editing in Zoom? Was it like a sort of a welcome break, or was it very difficult?
It was nice after years and years to just be like, okay, this is going to be a totally different thing for the last couple episodes here. And so it did give it a uniqueness and a unique feel and something everyone could relate to, because everyone went through it, obviously. But yeah, at first it was like, is this going to work? Like, maybe. And then I put one together and was like, no, okay. This is just like any other thing we've done. It's just the same as the other episodes. It's just all one camera, and we're just cutting around. And so the philosophy didn't change at all. It just like, there was a little bit of proving it out, but yeah, it was always like, this should work, and then it did. So,
I think that was also like Renat's biggest challenge was that we handed him 32, the final
Right.
episode,
Last one.
which is like 90 minutes long.
Yeah.
And
8 months of Zoom footage to watch.
It's
How long did it
8 months.
take you,
I
Renat?
think it's 3 or 4 months. I think it took just watching the footage took me probably a month or so, maybe more than a month, because there was just so much footage over those 8 months that all had to be watched through. And I think still a lot of the stuff maybe fell through the cracks because it was just unfeasible for like in our time frame to have watched through all of that footage. But
Yeah,
30
there were a couple
and
episodes
32,
in there
right?
that fell through the cracks for sure.
Yeah, how do you pace that type of stuff? Because whenever I'm coming to the end of a project, I'm just like, I'm done with it. Like I want it to be rendered, and I like the worst part. I feel like of our jobs is watching the final video. So we were currently trying to put together a Blu-ray of our what now seems incredibly small, but to us felt very big 80s series. And watching, I've had to do like 3 like runs of watching errors on it, and my brain is like fucking plasticine by the time I'm like halfway through it. How did you guys like error check this fucking thing? And you know, I didn't see any errors, so I don't know. But
Lots
did
of
you guys?
watching.
Yeah, can you guys spot them?
watching.
it was that's also like Renat was incredible at catching. It's like, oh, this colon shouldn't have a space here, but it should have a space here. I'm
Maybe
like,
too good. Maybe
Yeah,
too
it's like-
good. Yeah.
If you
Well-
could have slid through, it wouldn't have mattered.
fixing this space is going to require 6 to 8 hours of render time.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay, whatever. But like, we just
We
had,
were making
you know,
fixes
yeah,
up until the last day, pretty much. Like up until
Really?
the last week, we were still making changes. Like, we had a large,
had,
enormous Excel sheet that we were putting the notes for every episode.
Wow, you had your own bug. Was it P1, P2, or whatever?
yeah, basically.
I did.
And he also Renat had like a few at the very end where we were like, I don't know about
They're
this.
P5s.
Yeah, but then we ended
Oh, we
up
had the time.
we had the time, so
We
we
had the time.
kicked those off and fixed them too. So it's like, it was just a lot of watching, and I was always trying to be like, well, are we watching this too much? Like, what are the stages of production where you can watch it just to make sure, so that you're not like, maybe you're watching it 8 times instead of watching it 16 times, and trying to avoid like doing lots of unnecessary rewatches. But it's just like, seems kind of unavoidable in some ways.
One of the journeys that came up a lot as well in our chat was the journey of Asif as a collaborator and somebody who was with you guys right from the start, right? One of the founders of 2Player, and his journey towards, you know, an entirely new career. What was that like to watch? And was there any like, what was it like for you guys internally as a team as well? Because obviously there's a lot of work happening. You know, he's holding a decent amount of, you know, responsibility for the overall project as well. What was it like seeing him sort of drift towards a different shoreline?
I mean, at first, and it happened during Amnesia Fortnite, which is like our toughest shoots of all time, notoriously. It's always like, fuck, okay, we're going into Amnesia Fortnite, this is gonna be real hard. And then Asif's like, I can't do it, you guys. So there was like, what the fuck? But he was so good on camera as a character that he was almost better in front of the camera, like, than behind. It was like, shit, like, why hasn't he just been in front of the lens this whole time? But so he was so good as a character that it never really became a thing. It was just like, oh wow, now we have this great story we get to tell. And because he probably felt bad for us, or like felt sorry, he like would do any interviews we asked and be like, yeah, I can talk, yeah. And so like he felt so guilty about it that we milked that for all it's worth. And
Nice.
yeah. Good.
It was he works as like a proxy, I feel like, for a lot of viewers too who are watching this because they want to work in a game studio, and then it's like watching Bambi trying to walk those first few episodes when he's in meetings and stuff. Jeremy, you've obviously like been doing a bunch of game dev stuff. Like during COVID, you had a sort of similar thing, right, where you started to like learn Unity and make prototypes and fuck around and do all that sort of stuff. What was your experience of watching Asif as somebody who's like a video producer turned game dev, and you're having a similar kind of thing past couple of years?
Yeah, no, I mean, there was after embedding with Supergiant for a while, there was definitely times where I would just like talk to Greg Kasavit about a story that I was working on or things like that, because it's like it's hard not. You guys touch on this in the doc series, but it's hard when you're because being a documentarian is like involving yourself so intimately in somebody else's passion that you're like not only trying to erase yourself as a physical presence in the room, but also just trying to like totally project yourself into these people to kind of like have empathy for what they're doing, to feel what they're going through, so that you can appropriately document it. But in so doing, I definitely think there's I mean, obviously, like you also tend to document things that you're interested in, right? So obviously games are very important to me, but spending that much time around really passionate people who make games, I think it's impossible to not entertain the idea of like, oh man, this seems kind of awesome, like maybe I want to do this too. Yeah, so it was like cathartic for me in a way too, because there were definitely parts of embedding in Supergiant where you feel like I felt so much a part of their team in a weird way, but also kind of an outsider, that I was like, oh, maybe I like, it feels like working there in a way. You know, obviously you guys have a different situation where you're part of Double Fine, but yeah, I was like, oh man, this is like a parallel universe where I asked Greg for a job while I was filming at Hades or something. But yeah, that was really interesting. I also thought the interviews with Asif were so like candid, because he knows you guys so well. There was just a different kind of tone, and like it was so like blunt is the wrong word or something, but it would cut to Asif in another room talking to the camera, and it really just felt like him talking to people that he really knew and really trusted. It felt like as much as the rapport between you guys and the team is strong, it just felt like a totally different level. So I thought that was really cool for him to sort of cross the line and then bring like the, you know, like be sort of like the man behind enemy lines or something, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Did you guys ever flirt with working in game dev? Did you ever get involved a little bit that didn't show up in the project?
Paul and I both pitched for Amnesia Fortnite.
Oh, cool.
Right.
Years and years ago. But I think we might have all three of us pitched that year, and Asif was the person that won. And after that, it was kind of like working on the Amnesia Fortnite doc is so intense. It's like the most intense thing that we would ever do. And being down a person for that is kind of like, maybe we all shouldn't pitch anymore, because like, because that basically kills the doc, like if somebody gets selected. So like Asif had been, you know, Asif was always sharing ideas with Tim, like right from the very beginning, just when we showed up. And he definitely had like a passion for it all right from the get-go. So it felt kind of like that was the path that he was going to take. And he was, you know, working, not working, but like in his private free time, he was like teaching himself how to be a game developer. And I was thinking, it's like, well, I'm not doing that because I do other things with my spare time. But like Asif is spending his spare time doing that. That's his path that he's going to take.
Right.
You know? So it's like, if that's what he needs to do, like we're going to support him, because like, why hold him back from that? Like that's the direction his life is moving in.
Speaking of futures and life directions, what is it like then for you guys? Like, what's one of the things that I've always found fascinating about games development, and something that I've not envied from game developers, is the fact that they work on projects that take so long to finish. And it's one of the reasons I sort of stepped away from web development and went towards video, is because completing videos was very creatively satisfying, because it was done and then you don't have to work on it anymore. You don't have to patch the video. It's done. You walk away from it. You guys have obviously had a very similar experience to a game developer in working on a project for almost a decade, and then finally having that cathartic release of getting it out there. So what, I guess, you know, maybe this is an unfair question to labor you with, considering you're sort of maybe still in the shockwave of it coming out, but you know, what's next for you guys creatively? What's next for you guys at Double Fine, outside of Double Fine? Are you excited to go on another one of these journeys, or was this kind of like the last long form one of these projects that you think you were going to do. What are you going to do with the rest of your life, Owens?
I mean, in 10 years, you might hear from us and be like, hey, here's a new one, but it's going to take a long time, I know. It's not going to be anytime soon, that's for sure, because it's just like, right now it doesn't seem like there's a story that's forming. There's a lot's been happening with new games and stuff, but I don't feel like there's a follow-up doc in the works just yet. I don't feel like we've gotten there. So I think it's just keeping an open eye and just seeing where things develop. And so, I mean, it'd be great to do another one if we think it could be as good, maybe, so, but, it's going to be 10 years probably. So.
Right. Are you Double Fine employees now? Are you along for the ride with what's going on at Microsoft and all that?
Yep. We're going to keep
probably
doing
working on smaller stuff.
Much smaller stuff that we can do and put out in like a week as opposed to several years. Like, I'm excited about that. Like, I want to go back to doing, we had like our side quests series. It was just like a deep dive on a single person. Like, I find that stuff really fun.
Will Devs Play come back?
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, like, we're leaving the door open for everything right now because it's like, we've just finished this huge thing, and there's just like a little video streaming studio that's getting put together at the office now that we're going to like supervise. Cool. And just, see what people at the studio think, if they have ideas, and just try to sort of facilitate as much like creativity and insight as possible, and just get back into being more like visible and having more like footage actually coming out on YouTube instead of disappearing for so long. So
right.
We will have episode 33 though at some point before the end of the year probably. There's going to be like a follow-up that'll just talk about.
Now you said that publicly. We actually have to do it.
Yeah, we're getting people excited. Come on.
I couldn't tell if because I'm very excited about that, but I couldn't tell if that was like Dante just found a new circle of hell and he's going to jump in and do it again for you guys on the production side.
There's still a lot of stuff left on the table, I think, that we could talk about. So I don't know if it'd be like an official one. It might just be like the reunion episode, but I think there's a lot more to talk about. So it might be the first episode of the next doc. So maybe it'll come out in 10 years, who knows? Or it might be this year. I don't know. We'll see.
There's the Double Fine office is getting sort of like redone in like probably the most significant way it ever has been. So it's like,
right.
I've kind of been a little like, well, I want that to be finished so that when we come back to that space and when we're talking to people in that space, and it's like, it's different than like Zoom meetings. It's different than what the doc used to look like. So hopefully we can sort of just have like this fresh approach and like a new look and a new energy to everything.
Can you talk to Tim about the lighting before they put that in? Just no fluorescence.
I have been, we'll see. We hope that the new stuff that's getting put in will hopefully be a lot better. Yeah.
Just put Ari Friedels in every room. Just rip all of the fluorescence out and put nice cinematographer lights in every room.
They're very hot.
Yeah, exactly. It's a big fire hazard, but it would look really good.
One last thing before we cut you guys loose. Thank you so much for making the time. It's a part of filmmaking that is like so big, so much part of the process of making anything creative, but often doesn't sort of come out on the other side for the viewer, and they might not know. And that's just like how expensive this sort of stuff is to like make. What can you say about like just, I guess, the level of not just creative and emotional investment that Double Fine have put in you guys, but also just there's not many studios that have any video production teams, let alone like film quality video production teams working like 365. Like it's a fairly incredible like commitment to make, and obviously as we saw in your series, making games is already incredibly expensive, and sometimes the future of studios is on a knife's edge and stuff like that. What's it like having like in a way a patron like Double Fine to enable this type of work? How do you feel about that, I guess, is the question. What's that like, having that type of relationship with them and that level of investment?
Insane. Tim's just a crazy guy. He's insane, and it's all Tim. He's really like, I mean, I gotta give it to Tim on this, because it's just the fact that he's like, yeah, let's do this, let's put this out, and just like, damn, okay, dude, you got huge balls for doing that. Okay, Yeah, it's all Tim for me. Paul, you got something?
Just the fact that like like 2-player was always like also surviving on a knife's edge. Like we were project to project. We never had like profit. Like we'd make money to pay ourselves and get equipment, and like that was it. And like coming to Double Fine and sort of seeing them struggle in the same way. Like initially we brought all of our own equipment, and we bought all of our own equipment, and we would use that. And it was a while before we got a server at Double Fine because they didn't have that type of money to throw around. It's like the company was always just like, as you see in the documentary, it was struggling. So like it wasn't until like the Microsoft thing where we actually got like an equipment refresh. It was like officially funded, and we got like an even bigger server. And then we got shut down for COVID, so we never really got to use anything all that much. But like just the sense that that they could put us on as employees eventually, like that happened. And then we were payroll, and we didn't have to worry about keeping 2-player alive anymore, so we could put all of our attention into this. And like we're also making trailers for them and doing like marketing videos, and like trailers and marketing videos are outrageously expensive.
That's true. Yeah.
So it kind of felt like, well, they're investing in us to do like their marketing stuff. So it's kind of like, it never really felt like we were wasted like money at the studio because we're doing the stuff that they would have been paying somebody else for anyway, along with the documentary. So,
and maybe some of that budget comes from Microsoft, the marketing budget. They can just pull over from the Microsoft Excel column.
After the Microsoft buyout, they started doing. That's when we would get like external trailer people. So it's like that didn't fall off. That we didn't have time to do any trailers. Like when the game was launching, we were still helping with like support material where. We did all the dev interview videos that we put out, and I was doing screenshots for like marketing and stuff. But the documentary, like in those last couple of years, was so incredibly intense. But thankfully, like the Microsoft stuff was there so that they could hire outside studios to do that work, because doing like trailers to that level takes like months, and it's nothing that we could have handled as we're trying to polish the doc up.
And Renat, have you been out to the Bay Area yet? Have you had the chance to come out here, especially considering COVID basically put a stop to a lot of that type of international travel?
Not yet, unfortunately. It is my hope to visit the folks this year, so hopefully sometime later this year I will be able to meet up with everyone.
That'd be terrific. Go to Taco Bell. Go to, I don't know, what's the
been
San
talking about
Francisco
that.
place to eat now? I guess don't bring them to Mel's. It's fucking terrible. What's the good San Francisco eatery? I don't know why I said Taco Bell.
We have been talking about Taco Bell because he's never had Taco Bell.
Taco Bell's pretty.
I want to
alright.
definitely stop by at least for lunch. So.
It's good. It's good cheap food. Yeah, can't complain with it.
Yeah.
Paul, and Renat, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your time today, but also just it's fucking insane. It's incredible, and it's been great watching people slowly come to it on Twitter. I've been sort of like also enjoying people being like, "Oh, I'm gonna give this a go." It was the same thing. Me and Jeremy were like, "Oh fuck, man." 20. It's so long.
Dude, it wasn't
even
even the length for me. It was the fact that like it's so close to what we do
Close to work,
for work
yeah.
that I was like, oh man, like I'm sure this is so good, but I don't know if I can enjoy it because it's like watching someone else what I do for my job or something. Like I was like, it's gonna feel so close to work to enjoy this, and then I just threw on the first episode. I was like, oh no, this is so effortlessly enjoyable. I just want to.
It seemed like a lose-lose, right? Because it seemed like it could. If this is bad, then I have to sit through this bad thing.
And if it's
this
too
is
good, then I feel terrible.
Then I'm gonna feel bad.
Yeah, exactly. But I just like you guys did a fucking phenomenal job. This is literally one of my favorite doc series I've ever seen in my life. It is inspirational. It is like probably one of the without question one of the best creative docs I've ever seen. Docs about like the creative process and about collaboration and about what it takes to like do art in a professional capacity. It is very rare to see a documentary that is both so like intimate but also I don't know. It just like the word embed takes on a new meaning when you do it for this many years. It really felt like you guys got to the core of this in a way that is very difficult for filmmakers to do, especially like I feel like a documentarian is inherently kind of an outsider in whatever they're documenting. And this series crosses that line so profoundly that it just felt really special. You guys did a fucking phenomenal job on this.
It has been the culmination of years and years and years, and we were just happened to be in the right spot at the right time, and got really lucky with the story. Like 90% of it was just like total luck in terms of like, oh my god, this is happening now, this is happening, this is happening now, and this is works so well with this, and we've set this up, and look how poetic this thing is. Just happened that way. So we got lucky. For sure.
But you got to be a good craftsman. Even if you give the best ingredients to a mediocre chef, they're not gonna wow you.
Cook the stew.
Yeah, exactly. Someone's got to cook the ingredients. So yeah.
Excellent. Thank you all so much again. And if you're watching this or listening to this and you haven't checked it out yet, Double Fine Psych Odyssey. It's all up on YouTube. Go watch it. Stick it on your Apple TV like I did. Sit down and with a big bowl of popcorn and do it all in one go. Live stream yourself watching it for 24 hours. There you go. That's what you should do for Extra Life this year. Paul, Renat, thank you so much for your time, and best of luck with your next Odyssey.